Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Turbo Tortoise Tech. On today's show, we've got some awesome RTX goodness coming at you. Welcome back to T3. My name once again is Reese Wookie XXL Crossley, and I will be your guide here today with some RTX goodness. MSI has very kindly sent us their Armor and Gaming Z editions of the RTX 2070, which I do have here on my right. Having a look at the looks and feel of the card briefly in the system, it does look absolutely spectacular and fits in there like an absolute glove. But I think this is not going to quite cut the mustard. Cut the mustard. I don't think that's going to cut the mustard. Let's have a closer look. Now, before we get into the benchmarks, there are some physical differences between the two cards. Let's have a closer look and go through them. We're going to start off with the Armor card. It does have the Torx 2.0 fans from MSI, as well as a nice hefty, I would say 250 watt or 225 watt cooler on here. Now, of course, with all of that, it does create quite a lot of weight. So what they've done to combat that is they've gone with a beautiful full embossed backplate, as well as a strengthening beam which runs in directly with the remainder of the card that should prevent any extra sag. They have also put an LED over here which is RGB, and it's the first of its kind on MSI Armor series cards. Now that is quite nice, but we have its big brother over here to the side in the Gaming Z. Now this is a full 300 watt cooler. Definitely it does create quite a bit more weight. Once again, the beautiful backplate and the strengthening beam are present exactly the same as its little brother. It does, however, come with Torx 3.0 fans, which are slightly better at moving air and a lot quieter, I must say, overall. Now this is extremely heavy. I mean, even compared to the Armor, I'm going to hold both of them here so you guys can kind of see the difference in density and thickness. You can see the cooler's a little bit longer and thicker on the Gaming Z, and with all the strengthening plates and all that metal, it is obviously still a little bit heavy even for the plates that they've put there. So MSI has answered with this over here, being a full strengthening beam that you can put underneath your GPU, and it does line up quite nicely with the True Gaming underneath the side of the card. Let me just get it around so it would look something like that when installed, which is actually really, really nice. It is also fully adjustable. It does have, let me turn this back around, there we go. It does have full adjustable sections over here, so you'll be able to get it into your build lined up no matter where you put it. Now, of course, the thicknesses in these coolers affect its overall thermal performance and benchmarking scores, which we will get into now.
Alrighty then, so let's get into the benchmarks. It's important to note the core clocks before we start. I left the Gaming Z basically completely stock for the majority of the benchmarks. All I did was increase the power limit, and that saw a core clock of 1950 megahertz, an impressive 120 above the quoted spec on their website and 14,000 on the MEM. And then for the Armor OC, I got an overclock of 2020 megahertz. Now this I did add 100 onto the core and 375 onto the memory, giving me a 14750 megahertz effective on the memory. This did come with a bit of a cost though. The fans did spin up quite a lot more, and the temperatures on average were 74 degrees for the Armor and 66 for the Gaming Z. So do take that into account. But looking at the benchmarks, let's jump straight into it with BF1 Ultra.
My ears are ringing!
On BF1 Ultra, we see a frame rate of 139, so a little bit under the overall average that we saw with the 1070 Ti, but a far better minimum frame rate and much smoother playing experience. I must say it was incredibly silky smooth on both GPUs. We do see the Armor OC pip the Gaming Z slightly here, but not by a large margin, and once again with quite a bit more noise and heat.
Lads, let's find the rest.
Moving on to CSGO at maximum, we see a slightly lower FPS from both GPUs. I can only assume that this is due to perhaps some driver issues or some compatibility or improvements that need to come through on the drivers, or from the title itself for these new graphics cards. Moving on to Dirt 4 Ultra, we see our first massive increase in 46% and 51% respectively for the RTX GPUs, and it is noticeably better obviously with 30 frame rate difference. The playability of this, especially when recording as well, was just astounding. You literally drop 10 FPS to record at the same time and produce stunning visuals with this game. So the RTX with a big win here. Moving on to Doom 2016 Ultra, we don't see much improvements in the average frame rate, but we do see once again in the 1% lows. Now, quite interestingly here, the Armor OC, especially with the overclock, wasn't actually having a good time, and it was jittering around quite a bit. I can only assume this is due to Vulkan's efficiency with grabbing CPU or GPU usage, at least in this instance, and the card was kind of just darting around a little bit here and there, so the overclock not really giving a nice stable playing experience here.
Underneath the noses at 3 here.
Moving on to Dota 2 Ultra, we see losses all over the place for our RTX series graphics cards. Once again, I think this is down to the Volvo engine and down to some needed driver updates, I would say, that need to come through from Nvidia's side to see real performance increases. Yeah.
Let's go for it. He just walks up the center.
Looking at Metro Last Light, we see another big win for the RTX cards, pulling in 27 and 30% better scores respectively. Once again, we do see quite a low drop there from the Armor OC, so I think that's once again due to the clocks not really, or the power delivery not really being able to deal as efficiently with those clocks as we would like. Moving on to Overwatch Epic, we see a massive improvement from the Gaming Z. The overclock on the Armor did not fare well, it didn't like it at all, and the game was basically protesting at me saying, what is going on here? I do not like this. The Gaming Z, however, did a spectacular job with 52% increase, making 229 playable. Now that, with a 240Hz monitor, is absolutely sublime. It's so smooth, it's like wiping your eyes with silk. Moving on to everybody's favorite jump in and shoot 'em up PUBG, we do see a small performance increase, but the overclock showing a massive performance increase and far better 1% lows. I must say the RTX cards are far less jittery on this very woefully optimized title, but they still kind of fluctuate around. Let's hope that Bluehole pulls finger one day and starts to get their efficiencies in line. Moving on to Quake Champions Ultra, we see no real performance increase, 6% with the heavy overclock, but once again it did dip out and jitter around quite a bit during the tests, which was less than ideal. We see a very stable performance coming through from the RTX 2070 though, and once again, if you're going to do recording, the difference on the 1070 Ti and 1080 that I had was about 30 to 40 FPS, whereas with the RTX it would only drop 10. So if you are looking at doing streaming, this is looking more and more like a really good option for you.
Stopwatch.
Moving into some synthetics now, looking at Unigine Superposition Extreme, we see massively better scores coming through from the RTX series GPUs and with really good temps. Once again, in the entire test, the Gaming Z only got to about 63 degrees. You will see a slightly higher temp with the overclock, as well as a marginally higher score. Not really that much to write home about between the two GPUs here. The overclock not really factoring in here. On Unigine Superposition 4K, it's more of the same. However, that gap gets infinitely smaller, and then you can only assume that's due to the limited memory bandwidth of 256-bit on this GPU, which I think is going to hurt it when we look at higher resolution scores. Moving on to Heaven 4.0, we see a 4% and 8% increase in the average frame rate respectively, and I would not say that this is consistent with the general performance increase, once again leading me to believe that perhaps it's time to drop the good old Unigine Heaven benchmark 4.0. Cue world's smallest violin. Moving on to Vermintide 2 Extreme, we see small performance gains here for the RTX series GPUs and some loss coming through from the 2070 on OC, at least when on Ultra. I can only assume that this is when it's using 100% of the GPU resources and the GPU power phasing just can't deliver as we would want. Looking at the remainder of these scores though, we notice that with high preset, and as we lower it, the gap between the RTX cards and the 2070 Ti completely dissipates, and that probably will be consistent for the remainder of Unreal 4 engine games. Moving on to Firestrike, we see a 7% increase in performance. Now, the Firestrike score you see here for the Armor OC is the original clock, and you'll see that the FPS doesn't actually increase all that much. When we look at the Gaming Z with its boost, it does increase 7% over the 1070 Ti or 1080 kind of baseline that we have, so it is going to be noticeably improved, at least with frame rates. Albeit there is some offset with the physics. The CPU was having a bit of a warm day, so it decided to have a little less boost than usual, but nothing to write home about there. Looking at Firestrike Extreme, this is a little bit surprising to me. We see the gap actually gets slightly wider here between the GPUs, especially on physics test or graphics test 2 at least, where we see 10% increase in performance, and on the combined test a 24% increase in performance. Carrying on to Firestrike Ultra, we see the gap then get slightly narrower as we move into higher resolution space. It will be 8% better only on the combined test, and the FPS and graphics scores only 7% better. We do see a much better performance here from the OC, so it's clear that 3D Mark is able to take full advantage of every megahertz spared. And finally, having a look at 3D Mark Time Spy, we see an improvement from both RTX cards, albeit with some offset. Very interestingly, the first graphics test benefited from having overclock by quite some margin, and the second test was then slightly worse off for some reason, which is very, very odd. But all things considered, it is going to be quite a significant improvement over the 1070 Ti on this 1080p test. And here's where things get a little bit interesting. What I decided to do now was to see how far I could push the Gaming Z, because it obviously has much better cooling, so it therefore should be able to clock higher, and it was able to do that and hold a stable clock of 2055 megahertz, which saw us not only completely smash the Armor OC scores as you see here, but it also put us at the top spot on 3D Mark, which is unprecedented. I literally never thought I would see my name on the top of the board there. Looking through the scores, you can see that there is quite a bit of performance increase with this overclock, albeit with some temperature. It did now get to about 71 degrees, but I didn't actually have to increase the fan curve. The Torque 3 fans run super silent and super quiet, and until about 80% fan curve, you literally will not hear a thing, and they don't even go there. The fans generally top out at about 60-65%. So the Gaming Z as an overclocking platform, I mean, these these things are quoted at 1830 megahertz, and they are able to produce 2055 out of box without changing the voltage. That is simply fantastic, and this is going to be a very, very good buy, especially when you're looking at doing multiple workloads. So if you are in a streaming environment, then for me this is almost a no-brainer. You can eliminate an entire another computer by just having an RTX series GPU in your machine.
So as you can see, the RTX 2070 GPUs do have some serious 1080p gaming chops. However, I don't think in kind of a normal day-to-day scenario it would be more value than the 1080, albeit unless you are doing rendering or multi-workload applications, in which case the RTX completely thumps it. So it does have its own niche positioning, and considering the very, very sly underhanded release of the new GP104 core 1060, I can only assume that they have a large amount of stock which they are trying to clear through those channels first. But if you are looking for that multi-workload, then in my perspective there's almost no choice. You need to get yourself an RTX 2070 if you're doing streaming or the like, or in gameplay capture and recording. This thing is going to be an absolute superstar. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for this episode. We hope to see you in the next one.
In the YouTube, you must like and subscribe. If you want more content, you gotta click the little bell stuff over here, somewhere in the corner by the stuff. But like and subscribe.